thanks you all for being here. Great, great privilege for me to be sharing a stage with Kai-Fu and Andrew, who are people, I call it sources, you know, so you guys are like my rabbis. And I also had the best crab of my life once with Kai-Fu in, was it Shanghai or Beijing?
Beijing.
In Beijing, yeah. So I have about 1,000 questions. We have a lot of time. We have about an hour. We're going to talk amongst ourselves, and then we're going to open it up because I'm sure all of you have a lot of great questions as well. And please, you know, redirect me, be colloquial. Let's take this where we want to go. There's a lot of news that I could lead off with right now, and it's been a difficult week, to say the least, in U.S.-China relations. But let me start with a more personal question, because one of the things about your book that's really wonderful is I found it to be both a learning experience, but also a real personal journey. Writing a book is not easy. Andrew and I were just kvetching before coming in here about how hard it is. You didn't need to do this. So what prompted you? What was the sort of personal thing that really galvanized this for you?
Sure. Well, I'm a venture capitalist in China. We have had the fortune of investing a lot of unicorns, including 5 AI unicorns. And as I look at the success of these AI companies, I realize that many of them are not just creating value, but they're also displacing human jobs. And I feel there's a social responsibility to share that with people and also to point to some possible solutions. So that's when I came up with a few ideas that might work, and then I wrote some op-ed in the New York Times. Sorry, FT. Okay. I wrote FT also.
We reviewed it in the FT first.
It is. And then the publisher came and said, "Would you like to write a book on this?" And he said, "One caveat: you don't have experience in the U.S. writing about economy and philosophy, not like Andrew here." He says, "You better put the word China on the cover." So we managed to find a way. So actually what you're getting is 2 books in one. Buy the book I wanted to write and also get to know about China.
Okay, Andrew, I'm going to draw you in just a minute, but I want to ask one more question first. Kai-Fu, the takeaway from your book, and a lot of people try and write about artificial intelligence, and you come away feeling like you knew less than you did before you began. Your thesis is, in some ways, I found very simple, that you believe that there is a race for these technologies between the US and China, and that the winner, if I've got this right, and correct me if I don't, the winner is going to be determined by whether or not you think we are in the innovation phase of AI or the implementation phase of AI. Is that right? And what do you mean by that, is that?
Well, yes, that's part of the book. I believe if you look at the last 62 years of AI development, there has been only one breakthrough innovation, and that was 10 years ago, a technology known as deep learning. Since then, I don't think we've seen another equal breakthrough. So it's kind of hard to project that there will be more breakthroughs every year or every 5 years or even every 10 years. So we might very well be in the implementation phase, just like the invention of electricity, operating systems, the internet. That was one big thing, and then lots of ways to use it. So I think that we know is definitely happening. We're in the implementation phase. And if we are, China has a lot of advantages with very tenacious entrepreneurs, a huge amount of data, and very supportive government policies. On the other hand, US is also implementing, so it's clearly doing fine too, but also US is way ahead in research. So to the extent there is a breakthrough, and I definitely allow for that possibility, US could very well take the lead. But one final clarifying thought I want to add is that US and China actually are running in parallel universes. Chinese VCs funding Chinese companies, building products for Chinese customers. So this is not really, at least commercially, not a zero-sum game. The gain of a Chinese company does not come at the expense of an American company.
That's a crucial point, actually. And I want to tease out a lot of what you said in follow-up. But Andrew, let me ask you, the idea of innovation versus implementation, do you agree with that framing? And what do you think about the argument?
I want to say, first of all, Rana, thank you for coming here and moderating and refereeing the bout between me and Kai-Fu. The problem is, unfortunately, that I think you and I agreed 90+% of the way, so this might be a boring conversation. We'll try to make it spicy. And first of all, your book is amazing. Thank you for writing it. Everybody read it as quickly as you can. I think it's about 3 or 4 books in one. Yeah. You tell a very personal story. You educate us about AI. you warn us about job and labor displacement, and you talk about this horse race between the United States and China. This is 4 books in one. It's not surprising to me that it's already on the New York Times bestseller list. And as Rana, as you said in your introduction, the stakes are high these days. And I think we continue to underestimate just how high the stakes are. Because what Kai-Fu and I both deeply believe is that artificial intelligence is one of these things that economists are obsessed about, called general purpose technologies. And they're properly obsessed about them because these things come along maybe less often than once a century. And when they do, they quite literally change the world. They put humanity on a different trajectory, and they change the global balance of power. So the first one of these that we really saw was the steam engine, which kicked off the Industrial Revolution, made Great Britain the most powerful country of the 19th century. The sun never set on the British Empire. Britain launched a successful war against China to keep opium markets open. Get that kind of power halfway around the world. Right around the turn of the 20th century, there was this 1-2 punch of internal combustion and electricity, which America was most successful at developing and exploiting, took the lead from the UK in terms of the economy, in terms of the military power, and became the dominant story of the 20th century. Now here we are early in the 21st century, and what Kai-Fu and I both believe deeply is that we have another general purpose technology, for reasons we might get into, called AI, called machine learning. The country that wins, and maybe we'll talk about what winning means, the country that wins this one is very likely to be the dominant story of the 21st century. And as an American, I'm going to play for the home team here. My worry is not so much the strengths that China has, that Kai-Fu was very, very articulate about. It's the fact that as we start this race, I feel like my country is shooting itself in the foot, which is not a great way to start off a foot race, right? So maybe we'll talk more about this, but I feel like as we're starting this off, China is taking very serious steps to get its environment right to succeed. I feel like my country is taking some very serious steps to put us in a worse position.
Okay, that's a great tee-up for some of the news of the week, which I definitely want to talk to you all about. But let me take a step back, actually, and just, I think we have a pretty sophisticated audience here, but just for those that don't really have in their mind yet a definition of what artificial intelligence is, I'd like to hear the definition that both of you would give, and perhaps how that's changed in the last 10, 20, 30 years. Kai-Fu, do you want to start?
Sure. When I first started studying AI 38 years ago, when I was a sophomore at Columbia, I thought AI was figuring out the human brain. And that really didn't happen. That's called artificial general intelligence, or AGI in short. That's still a long-term pursuit that may or may not happen over decades. What did happen was an amazing pattern recognition technology called deep learning. And that is a technology where if you feed it a ton of data from a single domain, and then with the outcome that is objective, then it will learn to estimate or decide at a much higher accuracy than human. For example, you feed it a lot of Go games, it learns to play Go better than humans. If you feed it a lot of loan data, it learns the likelihood of default better than humans. If you feed it a lot of Amazon purchase records, it has a better idea than humans. What things can I show you that you're likely to buy? So on single domain, large amount of data, objective answer type of tasks, it is providing superhuman accuracy. Sounds very limited. However, if you think about what we humans do on a daily basis, or all people's jobs, many of the jobs are just as I described. And even those with more complex jobs, there are components of the jobs that are routine and can be better done. Right? This is also called artificial narrow intelligence, ANI. And when I talk about AI tonight, and in my book, I generally refer to ANI because I personally don't see AGI happening in the short term.
Okay, Andrew, would you add anything to that?
Except this is one of those unfortunate areas where Kai-Fu and I agree, so this is really uninteresting. The AGI quest is not what's going on now, but the label that you just used is a little bit too conservative a label, because it can be narrow in a domain and economically very, very, very important if there's a big industry based on that domain, recognizing fraud, making purchase recommendations. And if there are a lot of jobs that happen in that domain. Diagnosticians are a very, very large category of people in the medical industry. They're very well compensated people. I want Dr. Watson as soon as possible, right? Because the really profound thing that has happened is exactly as Kai-Fu says, we are no longer the world champion pattern recognizers. Even in domains that we invented, like playing Go, like playing poker. This is extraordinarily subtle, difficult pattern matching, and we have finally been able to build systems that are demonstrably better than the very best of it. One of the things I loved in your book was how you opened it. It was in 2017 that the Chinese players played against AlphaGo.
Right, yeah.
Tell that story, it's such a great story.
Yeah, I use that because it's more dramatic, but the actual moment where the Chinese people realized how powerful this was in 2016, when AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol, the Korean master. Because Chinese people believe Go to be a Chinese invention, so there's a sense of ownership. There's also a belief that it's not just the high IQ, but it's experience and wisdom and intuition. It's not something machines could easily do.
All these qualities that we thought were inherent to us, were so valuable, were unreplicable by some stupid machine.
Okay, but wait, I want to back up because I actually,
This is absolutely true.
as it so happens, I happen to have just yesterday done another interview with Garry Kasparov, of all people. And, you know, this is the guy that was beaten, 20, 30 years ago by Deep Blue. A lot has changed, and he was a little skeptical about AI being all that. So what would you say to him?
Skeptical about what?
About the idea that this was a transformative technology that was really going to sort of change everything in the way that we've been talking about.
Even after seeing AlphaGo Zero?
Yeah.
Even after AlphaGo Zero?
I think Gary's point, and I think both of us have talked to Gary about this, he finds it kind of intellectually narrow, which maybe you could make that argument. It is not economically narrow.
Okay,
it is not geopolitically
that's
narrow.
a crucial point.
I agree.
Yeah, okay. And so, all right, so to come to that, let's talk about how artificial technology, machine learning is being used in China right now versus the US. I mean, one of the things that you sketched, and I remember having a similar conversation maybe a year or two ago over dinner with you, where you were talking about some of the things that Xiaomi, the Chinese company, was doing. And how China was its own ecosystem now for technology, and that the penetration of technology in China was so deep and so broad. And then when you couple with that the fact that data collection is much more unfettered, you don't have, for better or worse, you don't have the same debate about regulation and privacy there as we do here or in Europe. That then adds up to something very different than in the US, right? So can you tell us how that works on the ground?
Sure. Let's talk about the collection of data, for example. It's not so much that the Chinese users don't care about privacy or there are no laws. People just keep using their mobile phones all day, and there are all these apps. So WeChat is a super app in China. Many of you probably use it. It basically, you know, most people spend half their time within WeChat. So that captures basically all the things you do socially. And think about Facebook. If Facebook were to acquire Visa and MasterCard and Uber,
I think you would like to, but it's not a good political moment.
no, and Uber and Grubhub and OpenTable and Yelp, and the list goes on and on and on. That's kind of the WeChat app, and that's the kind of data Tencent has. It doesn't come from, you know, taking away privacy or stealing data or anything. It's just through use that it has the data. And also anyone on their ecosystem, a JD for e-commerce or a Mobike for ride sharing, would have their segment of the data. If you have a retailer and you have 100 stores, you would have your segment of that data. So everybody has data, and the data is legitimate and it's deep. So China now has 3-4 times more people than the US. And each person, let's say, has 3-4 times more data. That's 10 times more data. And AI gets better with data, so that is the depth. But also think about the Chinese. Actually, I think my book is 5 in 1. The other thing I talk about is that the Chinese entrepreneurial ecosystem has become a parallel.
This really worried me because I think that people in Silicon Valley work really hard and you think they're slackers. So which means I must be incredibly lazy.
I missed this book. This is another book, and it's the best description of the Chinese tech entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yeah, talk about this a little bit. This is very interesting.
Yeah, and it adds to AI, of course. So Silicon Valley is basically tech-centric, vision-driven, dent in the universe, Steve Jobs being the typical role model. The Chinese system which began as copycats. But because there were copycats, it forced the Chinese entrepreneurs to respond really fast, execute very well, and come up with, and the only way they can win is if everybody else loses. Because as long as there's a few more copycats in the room, they could raise some more money and copy you again. So, in the case of Groupon, there were 5,000 Chinese copycats of Groupon. So today, 4,999 died. There's one left, it's called Meituan. It's a $55 billion company. And it did so by making sure everybody died. And whoever didn't die, they bought them. MTMP and Mobike. But that's not a business model. What's interesting about the business model is that the Chinese companies, in order to avoid getting copied, ended up with a magical formula to building uncopyable companies. Right? How do you make a company that's uncopyable? Well, do something that's so hard that it would drive people crazy to copy it. So Meituan, for example, for like 500 million, probably 60–70% of the Chinese users, they can get, Meituan disrupted the way they ate. They can get a choice of maybe a few hundred restaurants to deliver to their home within 30 minutes of ordering, including cooking, for about 70 cents per delivery. Wow! So once you've done that, well, you've erected the highest wall. And how would anyone else do that? And the way that's done is not a light bulb. It is grinding away a few cents a month from $2.70 down to $1.70, eventually to 70 cents. It's by hiring 600,000 people who would work for less than, for minimum wages, essentially. And these are not people who could get a job at Foxconn factory, because if they could, they would. But now it's about training them to be courteous and good service providers. Once they are, they'll get another job. So the turnover rate is horrible. So you need an HR department that completely replenishes the turnover of 600,000 people.
And processes that can handle that kind of churn.
Exactly,
Yeah.
the HR process. And then you need to figure out, Uber Eats won't solve it because cars and gas are too expensive. So it's electrical mopeds. Then the battery, you run out of battery. Then it's building up battery replacement centers for them. And then, of course, there's some AI. The AI that figures out you should go pick up 10 boxes here, and then get a new battery, deliver 5 boxes, and then pick up 8 more boxes, deliver 4, pick up another battery. So that's the routing problem. So there is AI, and there is all the data. But now think Meituan now. First, they know all these things about the people. And all that knowledge allows them to do better ads targeting. Secondly, they're worth $55 billion because they're doing 25 million orders a day. And thirdly, if you dare to challenge them, well, first get $5 billion and hire 600,000 people. Feel free to give it a shot. Who would fund you, right? So that has erected a wall that's so high. And think about the risks that Wang Xing overtook. Suppose he didn't know he could get to 70 cents. Suppose he got to $1.70 and stopped. That meant every day he'd be bleeding $25 million.
So you're actually bringing up a lot.
Can I
yeah,
jump
go
in?
ahead. Yeah,
Because
please.
this is the point in the evening we've all been waiting for, where we actually disagree.
Oh, good. All right, bring it on.
And I don't disagree with anything you said except your initial framing, that Silicon Valley is mission-driven and China is market-driven. Here's why I disagree. Silicon Valley talks about being mission-driven. When you look at what Silicon Valley does, they just do product market fit, and they follow, they are extremely familiar with the Kai-Fu Lee playbook on barriers to entry, on winner-take-all markets, on scale, on grinding out operational efficiency. This is what great Silicon Valley companies do. They just might have a CEO who wastes some time talking about changing the world.
Really? Who does it? I mean, Amazon does it.
Model of continual
We're not going to
operational
name any names here. Let's not get
And the
up
food
there.
delivery companies get better all the time. Absolutely. Absolutely. They might not do it at the scale of 1.4 billion people,
I think
but that's because we don't have 1.4 billion.
I guess we have found a place we disagree.
Oh, good.
So let's take Uber as an example. The Chinese Uber, Didi. They don't just do all the fancy Uber permutations of Uber-like services. They're buying gas stations, insurance companies, car leasing companies, creating a total silo for what purpose? For the purpose of locking in the driver.
Right.
Because the weakness of Uber is that driver has 2 apps on the phone. As long as that's the case, they can't have a monopoly. So Didi would like to lock in the driver. So if you want the 10% discount in gas, 20% discount in insurance, then you better not sign up to my competitor. So I think maybe would you say that it's just the level of fierceness is higher? I would almost see it as a different model, but maybe you would say it's just more tenacity?
More ruthless.
More ruthless.
You know, I'm really not going to surrender Silicon Valley's lead in sheer ruthlessness and hunger for growth.
Yeah, that's
to,
like
to
you're
anybody.
cutting it
Like, I will
really
say that you guys
finely
are
if you-
at least the equal. I'm not going to give that one up.
All right, I want to pick up on a couple. You could take it outside afterwards.
Well, like Travis and Will have a fight outside.
That's right. So, okay, so you're bringing up a couple of, I think, very profound points. Yes, American companies are extremely ruthless. They would love to be able to ring fence as much as their Chinese counterparts. Unfortunately, unfortunately for them, they're bouncing up against regulation. There's already a regional fracturing happening in terms of how the US may regulate AI and big data and the tech sector in general, how Europe might do it, how China will do it. That's going to have a lot of consequences. I mean, it's having the practical consequence, which I hear about every day when I talk to people in the C-suite, of just the absolute confusion about what the standards are going to be, which game they can play in. I think it's interesting that you see Google right now kind of caught in the crosshairs of politics around some of these things. I mean, they're going in and depending on whose narrative you believe, either starting a search engine, another search engine in China, or thinking about starting one, researching one, at the same time that they're being pretty difficult around certain requests in Washington. I mean, how do you see these sorts of politics playing out?
Well, I think the two parallel universes will stay parallel, so any efforts to cross will be incredibly difficult, even if there were no trade dispute or regulatory issues. If I could brag a little bit, I would say that when I ran Google China, we brought 9% market share up to 24%. Had Google stayed, it would be intertwined in this parallel ecosystem and perhaps can hold on to, maybe even increase a little its market share. But once you exit and go down to zero, re-entry is extremely difficult. This is not a statement to say it was right or wrong to exit, but it's just a fact that we had that 24%.
Why do you think they're trying to re-enter now?
Okay, since I really know nothing, I can speculate. I would think, if I were a Google executive, I would think the Android ecosystem is giving Google nothing, right? I mean, it is giving Google so much in US and Europe from the requirement to put Google Play, YouTube, Gmail, Google Search, Google Maps, and those monetize, whereas Android is free. In China, Android is still free, and those 5 services aren't in the phones. So I would be wanting to find some way to monetize somehow those Android phones, and there's so many of them.
Yeah.
That would be one incentive.
Yeah. What do you think, Andrew?
Well, I love Kai-Fu's image of these different parallel spheres. I just don't think that they're going to maintain the border between them, basically the border of China. What we know about history is when one of these powerful technologies comes along, the countries that try to develop it also try to develop it on a global basis. The UK became rich by selling steam engines to the entire world. The US got rich in the 20th century by selling cars and General Electric to the world. I doubt that China, that the great companies in China are going to be content even with that very huge market for a long time. I think the country's ambitions are global. I think the company's ambitions are global. It's going to get fascinating when we watch the battles outside the Great Firewall of China.
So I partially agree with that. I think the Chinese companies are starting to expand in mobile already, and certainly in AI. If you see the way it actually expands is interesting. DD is not expanding into Southeast Asia and a lot of places. What it's doing is it's partnering with local partners that compete with Uber. But when you see them invest money in Southeast Asia or South America or other places, it comes with tech. Because suddenly the ride-sharing services are good, are competitive with Uber. The AI and the look and feel is injected. But I guess you would count that as expansion because it's through investment and technology injection. There is value to be realized, maybe data to be aggregated. So in that sense, I would see China's expansion in AI and mobile to probably in the roughly the following order: very strong in Southeast Asia, very strong in Africa when the time comes, possible and even likely in India, and probable but over time in Middle East, and that kind of, but almost have no chance in the currently developed countries because of the large acceptance of the intertwined American technologies and probably concerns about using Chinese technologies.
Okay, that's it. So I'm going to ask you just a couple more questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Let me challenge you on an interesting point that you make in the book. You talk about how the ability of the state in China to orchestrate economic development, have a kind of a coherent industrial policy, can be an advantage when it comes to AI. There are some, in the U.S. that might argue, well, if you look at how innovation typically happens, it happens in a more decentralized way. Now, you also make the point that some of the companies themselves are very entrepreneurial and decentralized, but if we assume that there is state control, that there might be greater state control in the future, how should we think about that in terms of innovation and an ecosystem that can really, take AI to the next level in China?
At this point in time, we don't see those signs, right? At this point in time, AI pretty much leaped forward without government participation until about a year and a half ago. So we were an early investor 5 years ago, and the Series B and C, the D that followed, were done without any government support. And I think government's coming in right now in a very wise public infrastructure kind of way. So they're building infrastructure to make autonomous vehicles safer, new cities for autonomous vehicle. So I think right now it sure looks like a win-win. They're doing everything private companies can't do. They are forming some investment vehicles, taking on late-stage funds, but I think they compete with the private funds. I don't think there's much difference. So I think the AI companies and the mobile companies currently do not have a high degree of government involvement. Obviously, government and its own agencies, Public Security Bureau, military, they're developing their AI, I'm sure. We don't really know what they are. Currently, it's kind of two separate. People, I think, in the West assume there's a strong commingling, but there actually isn't. Now, that's not to say it can't happen in the future, because one of the things happening in China in traditional industries is 混合所有制. It's like a hybrid format. Some public companies and private companies in traditional industries are basically combined together to hopefully get the best of both worlds.
And what they get, typically, is the worst of both worlds. If you look at the actual performance of Chinese state-owned enterprises, which is still the largest part of the economy, it's absolutely dismal. And the Chinese high-tech sector has been this wondrous exception to this for a lot of the reasons that Kai-Fu is articulate about. The question is what's going to happen going forward. The closer these come to SOEs, the more worried everybody who's wrong on China should be. There's another factor, though, there, which is that the experiment that China's running is so fascinating because this communist country, starting, as you say, with Deng Xiaoping, opened up a large internal market and allowed entrepreneurship to flourish and, like you point out, allowed vicious competition to flourish. This is a great idea in many industrial sectors, and it yielded the high-tech industry that you have. At the same time, I think it's probably fair to believe that every Chinese high-tech company might not have government investment. It certainly has government oversight and government influence in a way that's probably a good deal deeper than we're used to in the West. And we saw the cover story in Bloomberg this week was about how we discovered a tiny microchip on a lot of Chinese circuit boards, which were about to get installed in worldwide data centers, which was almost certainly installed by the People's Liberation Army. That is not a great recipe for getting your products widely accepted around the world.
Right. Well, you stole my next question, which was going to be the geopolitics of all this. So not only did we see that Bloomberg story this week, but you have the Department of Defense coming out today, actually, with a new white paper on U.S. supply chains, and there's certainly a push, interestingly, not just from the White House, but within the kind of security hawk community, within the far right wing, but also the far left, interestingly, to have reshoring and to really put more pressure at a time when U.S.-China relations are fractious, to put pressure on U.S. companies to insource. You know, there's just from many different quarters right now vectors that are kind of pushing this fight over AI and the technology of the future. There's worries that a trade war becomes a real war. What do you think about that? How worried are you? Is it blinking red for you right now?
For the trade war, I think it's a problem for both countries. I think nobody wins trade wars. And when I wrote the book, one of my hoped for side benefits would be that we will get to invest a lot more in the US and combine the exceptionally great research in the US with the great implementation and market of China. I have given up on that hope. I'm just happy to be selling more books and getting on the selling list, get to talk to Rana and Andrew and have fun with all of you, and I'll go back to China and just invest in China.
Yeah. It's a big market. I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, I don't think I'll have much opportunity to invest in the US, but I accept that, and it doesn't matter too much. 95% of our past investments were in China. We can make it 100%, it's not the end of the world. About the real war, I certainly hope not, but I have no expertise on that.
Andrew, do you want to weigh in?
You know, global supply chains are very, very fluid things, and they're going to respond to these pressures like trade wars, like national security threats. China has built up this amazing industrial base to supply the world's global supply chains of technology products. That's really, that's like it's a cruise ship. It's not going to turn slowly, but it can turn over time.
Okay, a lot more to tease out, but let's open it up and give you all a chance to comment, ask questions, go to entirely new topics, and don't be shy.
Can people introduce themselves first?
Sure, and if you want to introduce yourself, do we have mics, or should people just stand up?
We have here.
Okay, yeah, so raise your hand and we'll get a mic to you. And I don't, oh, there we go, first question. You get a prize.
My name's Jack. There's been a lot of talk about some of the dangers of AI. And I know that China has a lot of expertise. Obviously, as a large country, has problems dealing with such a large population, as the U.S. does as well, but it's probably a very different animal. I guess I'm curious about some of the dangers of AI and how we can avoid a dystopian future in both countries.
Okay, sci-fi, future, Terminator, what do you think?
Well, the sci-fi part, I don't worry about because I don't think we'll get that far. I don't believe in singularity. I don't believe in dystopian robot overlords about superintelligence. I don't think there's any evidence for that. However, there are lots of dangers. We talked about the job displacement issue. That's one of them. Also, I think security is another one. We're used to talking about PC and phone security, where usually the worst case is you install Windows or you throw away your PC. But in the case of AI, it's actually much more complex because viruses are not code anymore. They could just go in and tweak the numbers, and I don't know how it would be very hard to detect because deep learning is just a bunch of numbers which are unreadable anyway, and being updated all the time anyway because it's continuously learning, and you just tweak a few more numbers and suddenly, your loan application money could be sucked out. Face recognition, terrorists may not be recognizable anymore, and autonomous vehicles could be turned into weapons to run into people. So I think there needs to be a whole new discipline of security around AI. And I think either inadvertent or error or bugs or malicious are all potential dangers in security. I also think we don't understand the side effects of AI. Some people call it data bias, but for example, I don't think Facebook had a malicious intent to manipulate people's minds and increase prejudice. They were just saying, I want more people's eyeballs to read my newsfeed and let the AI algorithm do whatever it took. But it turns out, if you had a little bit of prejudice, they might show you more prejudicial articles that might make you more prejudiced. So these kinds of unintended butterfly effect type of things, some books have argued could lead to very big danger, and I wouldn't rule that out.
Yeah, unfortunately, I completely agree with that, so I apologize to everyone here. This notion, Kai-Fu and I both get involved in these singularity and superintelligence discussions way too often. He's more diplomatic than I am. I usually just start beating my head against the table in frustration, because it's so far in the future and it's so hypothetical. Our colleague Andrew McAfee has a great way to talk about this risk. He says worrying about killer robots and big scary AI is like worrying about overpopulation on Mars. But all the risks that Kai-Fu talked about, and in particular, he and I are both kind of sounding the alarm about labor displacement that we think is kind of likely to happen. The line that I always use is that if current trends continue, the people are going to rise up way before the machines do.
Okay. Dinda.
So, hi, I'm Dinda Elliott, programming here at China Institute. So, question for both Kai-Fu and Andrew. You've both done lots of thinking about the jobless future, and I wonder if you can shed some light on what that looks like and what we're all going to be doing with ourselves down the road.
Can I go first this time?
No, you go.
Okay, all right. So in my book, I go into this in some detail because we're actually funding companies, and we're seeing the companies are going after the routine jobs. So the jobs that are routine, both white collar and blue collar. White collar going first, because with blue collar, there's mechanical issues in being able to build an iPhone. That's not something robotics can do yet. But you can almost draw a path where increasing jobs of routine jobs will be displaced over the next, I'm saying 15 years. In reality, the technically feasibility is maybe 10 to 15 years. In practice, various things may take longer, but these jobs will be displaced by AI that's marginally very low cost, doesn't complain, doesn't sleep, and does a lot better. So what to do about that? I think we can go back and think about what AI cannot do. I think one is creativity, strategy, conceptual thinking, etc. But there aren't that many jobs in that category, and retraining isn't going to be very easy at all. But there are probably enough social jobs, jobs that require human interaction and compassion and empathy, jobs from nannies, nurses, elderly care, teachers, doctors, concierge, and so on. One could imagine a future world where there are 10 times as many doctors that rely on an AI engine and that has a 4-year medical degree from college, and maybe more like nurse practitioners, and that provide comforts and visit you at home and makes patients feel better. Patients are the most vulnerable. And the teachers could have AI take care of grading exams and grading homework and giving lectures even. The famous people can do that, and the teachers can be more one-on-one mentors. So if we sort of are a little bit optimistic and extrapolate a little bit, those job categories might be large enough and retrainable for the routine job workers to be retrained and move into that category.
This sounds like a crazy thing to worry about because the unemployment rate in the United States just hit a, 49-year low. The last time the unemployment rate was this low was 1969 in America. So he and I sound like we're just vastly ignorant to talk about this threat. But when you look at the job creation in the U.S., my colleague Bob Gordon, who's a very good economist, says it beautifully. He said, we don't have a job quantity problem, we have a job quality problem. We used to turn out lots of good old-fashioned middle-class jobs in this country. Now the job creation engine has downshifted, and it's turning out kind of lower middle-class jobs. Less well-paid, less secure, fewer benefits, no health care, all of those kinds of things. Kai-Fu is braver than me because he's giving kind of a time frame when that situation might tip, and we might have a job quantity problem because of these relentless advances in technology. I'm not prepared to argue with that. He knows a lot more about this stuff than we do, than I do. But if we play our cards right, This is good news, not bad news. Everybody wants more wealth and less toil. That's the world that we're talking about if we get this right. It involves very big changes to the way we think about life, a job, a career, a community, how you add value. It involves, I completely agree, maybe subsidizing some of these caring professions that we will need in large numbers in the future. For me, the good news is that the world that we're describing, you can look at it in kind of a scary dystopian way or in a utopian way. The optimistic thing to keep in mind is the world we're describing is an incredibly wealthy world. Because we're getting all these services done by machines at zero marginal cost. Holy cow, our prosperity is amazing. It's a matter of sharing it.
Before I take the next question, let me ask you just two quick follow-ups on that. What you're both saying implies we need wholesale reform of education, not just in the US, but probably in China too. Would you agree with that? I mean, to focus more on, say, liberal arts, sort of creative thinking, as opposed to just churning out STEM graduates?
Yeah, by the way.
No. Have you seen liberal arts these days? It's an indoctrination school. Absolutely not.
But what part of STEM is AI not going to be able to do? I want to push back a little bit here.
Identifying a problem.
Okay.
AI is terrible at that.
Creativity.
Right, but does that argue for a different kind of education than, what we have now in either country?
I think the US education is actually closer to where we need to be, but still very far. The Chinese education is much more rote learning. And I think we need more empathy. I think we need more one-on-one mentoring. I think we need more attention and social skills. And I think I personally think we need to discover the gifted and talented early and get them into, if they're willing, get them into the economic value creation chain as soon as possible. By the way, a little more advertising. Done enough already, so a little more. This Sunday on 60 Minutes, I'll be talking about AI and education in China. And a very short summary. While sometimes when you're behind, you have a late mover advantage. So China is now caught up in an environment where there are not enough good teachers, lots of mediocre teachers. There are villages with very, very inexperienced teachers. So we're now helping to experiment with using a combination of MOOC, face recognition, and automatic homework grading, automatic test exam grading, and also automatic English pronunciation error correction, and automatic math drilling to take over the parts of jobs that some teachers may not be good at, and then have the teachers do more one-on-one mentoring.
We're doing a great job, I think, in both of our countries of turning out the kinds of workers we needed 70 years ago. The mismatch is just absolutely unbelievable. When I think about the educational system that I think both of us were part of when we were kids, how many of us sat in an orderly grid of desks and listened to the voice of authority all day, every day, and did a different thing every hour? That's fantastic if you're going to go work in a factory and they want you to be an obedient assembly line worker. The actual point was to drive out creativity and to make sure you couldn't talk to your neighbor and develop social skills. That was what it was for. We really don't need that educational approach anymore. And I wish there were large-scale experimentation happening in the States along exactly the lines that you described. Good for you.
Question in the back there.
Hi, my name is Joan I've gotten a lot of mileage for having my last name spelled AI. I have a startup, which is a social impact startup, which is part of the NYU Steinhardt EdTech Incubator. And I was just recently invited to join the Coalition for Digital Intelligence. It was announced last week at the World Economic Forum. It's a collaboration between an organization called DQ Institute, OECD, and IEEE. And the goal is to provide a global standardization around digital intelligence to prepare people for digital skills and digital literacy for the future. And I was fortunate enough to hear you speak earlier this morning, and you had touched upon a subject around how, at the mass scale, how would you be able to educate, and Andrew, I'd like to get your thoughts on this as well, in terms of helping to spread the digital intelligence movement.
That is getting digital literacy. Yeah. Well, I think one of the good things about AI is that when applied to education, it can be more broad. right? Even though it creates wealth inequality from a job sense, the accessibility to education can be lowered by using AI and technologies to assist on that. I think some of them don't require AI. For example, one of the things we're trying is we're having a really good, super good Beijing teacher teach 800 kids at the same time with a large TV, and then with a modest amount. It's better than MOOC because there's interactions with clickers. So that's one way to broaden and reduce the cost of education. And another way to think about it is we're doing an experiment. This is brand new, no one's heard it before, so it'll be the first. We're trying to make a simulated teacher. Basically, someone to teach you English. Because natural language is incredibly hard. That's why these chatbots are always silly after a while. But the traditional teacher-student relationship is that the teacher is directive. So when the teacher is directive and the student is responsive, let me tell you about fruits. What fruit would you like to learn? Do you know the difference between an apple and an orange? Which one is this? That kind of teacher-student interaction, it is possible with now basically 3D graphics, motion capture, plus natural language understanding. It is possible to make a simulated teacher that is directive, at least good for entry-level learning. If that is possible, I think then education can be much more broadened than the 1 to 800 ratio.
Yeah, amen. Right now, the world's most popular way to learn a second language is a free app called Duolingo. So you can achieve astonishing scale with this, and as Kai-Fu says, when you put cutting-edge AI capabilities on top of that and combine it with the supercomputers that we all carry around these days, you really have the opportunity to have people interact with an entity that will help them acquire very advanced, very difficult skills. Learning a second language is an incredibly involved, difficult thing. I think we can make big progress on it.
Let me not ignore this side of the room over there.
Daniel Olin from the Manhattan for President's Office. It sounds like a lot of what you guys are talking about with preparing the job force, education.
Can you speak up, please?
Sorry. It sounds like a lot about what you guys are talking about with preparing a new workforce is starting at a younger age in the education system. What about the workers and employees that are already there, that are already through their education system and need upskilled and retrained? How do we kind of address that problem from either a policy scale or a private scale?
Yeah, great question, because I hear this from every single CEO I talk to, that they're having problems with this.
Well, I think there's a new movement for CEOs and companies to take a greater degree of responsibility for employees, not just to have a quid pro quo during their employee process, but really to ensure that if they exit with the skill set that they need. I think that's a fairly well-defined way. I don't know if all corporations are willing to do it. I recently heard Jeff Bezos talk about it, and he talked about, he didn't go into specifics, but he talked about his employees are able to, through Amazon subsidy, take classes to become a nurse. So I've got to be thinking that he has a very clear roadmap as to when his warehouse is getting automated, and and as one of the beneficiaries, right, the first $1 trillion company, he feels a responsibility to take care of them, and I think he sees maybe a similar roadmap. So I think corporations, if there could be some really good examples, and we all spread the word, I'd rather bet on corporations taking the first step than wait for the government.
What about the zero-sum problem? I mean, you certainly might have some individuals, some wealthy companies taking those steps. AT&T's doing this, IBM's doing this, but and Andrew, I'm curious your thoughts. Should we have a depreciation investment in human resources the same way you do when you buy machinery? I mean, are there any policy levers that you could see that would help?
This is a tough one. I'm not sure monkeying with the corporate tax code is going to achieve the desired goals. And your question is super vexing because the track record of mid-career retraining is not a happy track record. Most of the programs don't look very good, especially if you look farther on in time. Technology offers some hope, but right now it feels to me like, especially with adults trying to pivot and do something else with their careers. Technology is working as kind of a diamond detector. And what I mean by that is people who have the tenacity, the skills, and the curiosity, man, they can go skill up and retrain and go do really interesting things with their lives. What technology is not so far for people in the middle of their career is a rising tide that's going to float all the boats. I don't know how to get it there.
So it's amplifying the superstar effect, I mean, with individuals, but also companies too, and sectors, yeah?
We just see these amplifications all over the place.
Yeah, yeah. There was a question here. Here we go.
Hi, my name is Hart Chen. First of all, Kai-Fu, long time no see.
Hey.
It's been 15 years, I think. So I was wondering, I feel like a lot of what you guys have talked about is about how China has been really able to take applied AI and make it very effective in the marketplace. But if you look at the basic AI research at like conferences like NIPS, ICML, those still seem to be dominated by research institutions and companies in the West. Do you think, what is China doing to bridge that gap? Do you think that will converge in the next few years, or is that something that's going to take a while longer?
Oh, that won't converge. U.S. will be in the lead for a long time. China is getting better, right? I mean, 20 years ago, China probably comprised 1% of the publications. Now it might have 15 or 20. It depends on the caliber of the conference, I guess. In a mid-high level conference, Chinese publications might be 40 or 50%. So there's been good improvement. But I think the fact is that U.S. has two giant advantages. One is just better universities with better research, and two is a giant funnel that attracts the whole world's top IQ people to at least want to consider studying here, and some percentage stay. So those advantages cannot be reversed, and China cannot build one. China does not attract the top students from Korea and Nigeria and Italy to study there. U.S. does.
And what we're doing right now is pouring cement in that funnel.
Yeah.
Among the ridiculous administration policies, the anti-immigration stance has got to be the...
This was designed by our enemies. What else would you, if you really wanted to weaken America in a pretty fundamental way,
Right.
what else would you do, short of actually dropping bombs, except to try to cut off the spigot of the world's most ambitious, talented, tenacious people who desperately want to come here to build their lives? Wow, what a great idea.
And then we'll go.
This is unfair for me to grab a second question, but thank you. It's a follow-up to that, which is, you said that, okay, so China doesn't have, the U.S. has better universities and better research. So again, back to the news, we've been hearing about an ideological crackdown in China and the tightening of intellectual debate, discussion, whatever, at universities, and sort of rejection of Western thinking, etc. Does that matter? Is it going to make a difference to China?
Well, I think the pursuit of technological excellence is always a top priority. So I don't think there would be any significant impact.
But creative thinking, you've been talking about the need for creative thinking. That's what I'm curious about.
Well, the creative thinkers in technology, in AI in China, usually came to the U.S. at a younger age, get fully trained here, and then they go back. So I think the education system are just a vast gap that China is improving, but it remains vast.
Question here, and then we'll come over here.
Hi, my name is Tony. I'm a Butters producer and my mom. I've been reading a lot about AI, and I have a tech background. So people like Yuval Harari, he's a bestseller of *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*, and also Dr. Fei-Fei Li of Stanford and Global have been talking about this. Is that utopian or dystopian, but we are lacking, I think, at this time, whether in China or U.S., a representative force that is being employed or that is creating these startups or companies. So whether it's females or whether it's underrepresented groups, just like you said, if it's arts and humanities, if it's that, or if it's an ethnicity issue, what do you see in the companies that's coming to you or that you're learning about? How are those represented? Because I think whatever is created in the future should be representative of the world that we live in. What do you think of that?
It's about the diversity. You're asking me, for example, when do we expect half of our partners to be women?
Or what kind of thinking, because really it will be created, the code will be created, the algorithm will be created in 5 to 10 years, so who's doing that and what's that going to mean for the rest of?
Let me tell the punchline of my joke, please.
Okay.
So we have a plan to get to 50% men and women in my partnership. And the plan is to hire one more man. So we are actually doing that in our company, and we're very proud of it. We don't think such a VC exists in the world, at least not a top-tier VC. So I think,
Bravo.
thank you. And I think it is about the mindset, the environment that you create, and the effort that you put in to attract both great people and to enforce diversity. I'm an absolute believer in that. And I think that just needs to be more broadly understood. And I think all the work that Sheryl Sandberg, Fei Fei, and others are doing, that's just wonderful. I would say one thing about if we believe in what I said about the transition from routine work to compassionate work. That's going to really tip the scale a lot, because I think you can imagine many of the people who will become, I think the employed percentage, the women will exceed men because of the new shift.
Let me ask one question before we move on, a follow-up to that. In a couple of weeks in Europe, there's going to be a big Brussels-led conference on AI ethics and big data ethics. To your point, who's designing the algorithms? Do we need more transparency in general? And what would be the process for that in order to really understand what's governing these systems that are going to be governing our entire economy and all of us?
Well, I think it's the same issue as the diversity. I think you want your data to be very balanced. That's the most important thing. Obviously, workforce is important. A lot of the bias in the data is caused by just a lack of balance. I think that is the first step. And I think also you need reasonable quality data, because garbage in, garbage out. And I think the explainable AI part is always a tricky one, because as an AI scientist, I actually think AI has to, in some sense, dumb itself down to explain to us. Because think about...
Complexity always worries me as somebody that covered the financial crisis.
I know, but at the same time, how the 3,000 features interact in the 3,000 dimensional space, we can't comprehend. So I think explainable AI will just be asking an AI system to pick out the most prominent 3 or 5 things in a way that we can understand, but it doesn't truly reflect all the details. It's sort of a make work to sort of let people feel better, but it doesn't address your deep concerns, and I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, let me say a couple things on this. First of all, the really good news is that the pipeline is getting a lot better very quickly with diversity, with gender representation. A majority, I believe either a near majority or a majority of the advanced degrees in the natural sciences and physical sciences are now going to females instead of males in America. Carnegie Mellon's computer science department now, I think, is either close to or at 50-50 representation. So the pipeline is changing remarkably quickly, and those people are going to enter the workforce. So I'm pretty enthusiastic about that. Rana, wow, am I nervous about massive governmental oversight of innovation and research activities for all kinds of reasons, not the least of which is government sometimes gets it very, very wrong. The nutritional guidelines that all of us Americans were given were government stamped and approved and super bad ideas. So we kind of have this notion that there's this crop of super enlightened, brilliant, unbiased, unbiasable regulators that we need to parachute into industry. That's like believing in Santa Claus.
What about FICO scores for your data? What about something that gives people, citizens, an opportunity to correct mistakes, to be part of the process?
You know, the EU put in place a right to be forgotten. It was just a make-work project for the big tech companies. The big American tech companies.
They're lobbying pretty hard against it, but...
Yeah, well, it's law. Of course they're lobbying against it. It's a stupid make-work project, right? Well, what's interesting about that, I think that's a really nice test case. The right to be forgotten did not give an EU citizen the right to tell the Spanish newspaper website to take down the article, of which they allegedly have a right not to have exist anymore. It just made the American search engine not point to that article anymore. That feels like distant second best to me.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. Let's go here and then we'll come back. I'm sorry, was there a...
Okay. Hi. Thanks for your discussion here. My name is Fuoohar. I'm from Columbia University. I'm also a co-founder of a startup back in China. We focus on the computer vision problem. And my question is, as the technology develops, as you had mentioned, there's no huge breakthrough in the academia, but implementation tools have become more and more convenient. Let's say we can just build up a computer vision system in half an hour. So what's left is all about data, and I think data is all about money. So the big companies have money, so they have data, and they have the data. Their results would certainly better than yours, and then they would have more money. So the barrier is getting higher and higher. It's very hard for startups to step into this field. So,
you actually touch on that in your book a little bit. And you mentioned the fact that you were a little concerned, if I remember, about academics working alone without access to a lot of data and how they were going to be able to get into this game.
Yeah, so for academics, there are a number of efforts, including we are funding an effort called AI Challenger, which is providing free data for all academics, which I think is important. Otherwise, they'll get left behind by the giants. Now, as far as a startup, well, I think the art of building a great startup is a combination of course, AI scientists like yourself, but also someone who can really raise money, right? As well as finding an application area where the giants aren't going after, right? About 3 years ago, the giants didn't care about face recognition. So all these Chinese companies jumped on it, SenseTime and Face++, and then they actually got more data than the giants. And they got more contract and they got their valuations up. Now the giants can't quite stamp them out anymore. So it is your job as a CEO to see what's the next application that the giants don't yet have the data, and then come up with a credible plan and story to get a lot of money from VCs, right? I mean, look at how much money these computer vision companies have raised. And once you have that money, and then you secretly go build it, don't let the giants know. By the time they know, hopefully you have not just a lot of data, because they can always spend money to get more. Hopefully you have a pipeline that will get more data coming. Right? One of the first things we did to help Face++ when there was no face data was to connect them with Meitu, all the selfies, right? So we said, well, hey, let's have Face++ help you, make people more beautiful, and to do that, you have to know where the eyes are and the nose are, and then in order to do that, you have to know who it is and how old the person is and so on. So that was the loop that bootstrapped them. Then they got more business and they kept going. So the CEO's job is actually especially in China, it's about operational excellence. And it's about telling that story to the VC. And it's about building that product. And it's about keeping secret when you need to. And finally, when you want to raise that $100 million round, that's when you got to do your PR. So the CEO's job is probably a lot tougher than someone from academia would imagine.
You're asking a question about economies of scale, right? And you're asking a question about data economies of scale.
Yeah.
If economies of scale were that strong, there would be no disruption, there would be no startups, there would be no innovation. What startups do is they turn that strength, that economy of scale, into a weakness, into inertia, into a way that they can't respond effectively. And my career is long enough that I remember when we thought IBM would never be disrupted, when Microsoft had a stranglehold over innovation and technology, when no one was going to catch Nokia.
Let me add, I totally agree with Andrew, and think about who disrupted IBM. It wasn't another person who built mainframe companies. Who disrupted Microsoft? It wasn't an operating system, right? So
Google's not going to get upset, unseated by a better search engine. That's not what's going to happen. But are they a permanent monopolist? I'll bet against it.
Question.
My name is Jasmine Wong. I'm working with Columbia University now as a producer of the impact investing business case study. Since the AI is a new oil now, so if we want to find a good case to study at, do you have any recommendation?
Case for AI and impact investing?
That's an interesting question.
In my book, I talk about impact investing in a very different sense.
We're now up to 6 books.
But in a very different sense, because if I personally believe the service industry needs to have an injection of entrepreneurs and capital, but they don't provide the same returns as these high-tech companies. And I would think for impact investing, it's kind of making a case that you can return decent amount of return on investment, while 5–10% a year, whereas VCs shoot for 30 to 40% a year. So a few percent a year, not lose the money, and also define metrics of social impact. That is, you're creating, to be very specific, if we believe jobs are an issue, and if we believe jobs of empathy, compassion is what's needed, well, show that you can create that many jobs and keep people gainfully employed. If that goal is met while giving a 5% return, I think you can raise a fund. Sorry, it's not your question, but.
Thank you.
Question over here.
Hi. Speak loudly. Okay, my name is Yanni. Basically, I have a question regarding China. Mr. Lee, would you please elaborate a little more as a VC, what would be some of the regulatory or data security challenges that you're facing, and then how do you identify the data that are reliable to use going to machine learning or going to training?
Right. Actually, a very strong China regulation on data came out about a year ago. Very few people here follow that. But that was regarding sale of data that doesn't belong to you. And actually, the punishment is imprisonment. So what happened between Facebook and Cambridge Analytica would be actually more severely punished in China. So that is one law that has, I think, made a big difference. Prior to that, there has been various types of trades of data, sale of data, and then once that came out, I think people stopped that practice, and I think people don't look to buy data to start a company. When you start a company, you think about, I have technology, I go implement it for you as a business, I use your data, I never take your data outside your company, but possibly I can take models trained in your company. So that's kind of one model. The other model would be, well, I'm going to collect my own data. I'm going to build a consumer company, collect my own data, and use my data to have an iterative loop. I think this dependency on buying data and using it to create a business is really not the way to go in China or anywhere else.
I'm Robin Lewis. I'm a former dean at Columbia, CEPA. And this is a great thrill for me to have two of my kind of gurus here, because when I talk about, as I have in a number of places, AI and public policy, which is my field, I quote both of you extensively. Thank you. So it's great to meet you. But my question, a little more to Andrew, but also is that in talking about the public policy environment, and while I share your hesitation about the infinite ability of governments to muck things up, what I see in the public policy landscape in America is almost a blank slate. There's no attention being paid, there's not even discussion, public discussion, and I wonder how you see that playing out. Because in contrast to China, whatever it is they're doing, they're paying a lot of attention to AI. But in the US, it seems the government is just simply not there, not a presence.
Well, I think our federal government is not taking an active role, because I think they don't know what AI stands for. Almost quite literally, Secretary Mnuchin was asked about AI's impact on jobs and wages, and he said, we don't see that happening for 50 to 100 years.
It's not on our screen.
It's just not on our screen at all. So at the federal government, unfortunately, I agree with you, we were doing a lot better in the previous administration. I don't know if you were at the conference that Obama put together in Pittsburgh, toward the end of his administration. They put a blueprint out, like, there was some good momentum. I was right on board with it. Now we've just got a very different kind of philosophy at the top. But there's, I think, among policy circles, in different think tanks and universities and things that I'm participating in, there's a super active discussion. I think, are you just talking about the vacuum at the federal level? In which case I agree with you, sadly.
Yeah, I think that I mean, I spend a lot of time talking to these folks. The level of knowledge is like -11.
One of the other ways we're shooting ourselves in the foot is by having a government who's just deeply clueless about this fundamental phenomenon.
All right, we are basically at time, but I want to end by asking both of you to maybe put out there a red herring, positive or negative, a thought that we haven't covered yet in terms of what you're expecting in the AI landscape or what you're hoping for in the next 5 years or so. Andrew, do you want to start, and then we'll give the last word to Kaiku.
We spend a lot of time in these, fancy discussions being negative. And we need to keep in mind the world's worst problems have never been getting better than they are now. The number of people living in dire poverty is lower than it was in 1820. Not a lower percent of humanity, a lower raw number of people. We have never had mothers dying at such low rates, infants dying at such low rates. The gap in infant mortality between the developing world and the rich world is closing quicker than we've ever seen before. So over the past generation, it's appropriate to talk about the problems of the middle class and the rich world. It's absolutely appropriate. It's appropriate to talk about these problems of AI security and bias and ethics, absolutely. While that's going on, technology is making the world a better place faster than the world has ever improved before.
Great point.
All right,
Last
so
word to you.
we want to end optimistically, so I'll follow your lead. Well, I think we're looking at a lot of chaos in the next 20 years. I think we actually are looking at sort of 2 stages. The next 20 years, there's a lot of uncertainty. On the one hand, due to all the trade dispute issues, nationalism issues, policy issues. On the other hand, due to the uncertainty about AI safety, job issues, and other things, privacy related to AI. But I firmly believe if we get over this 20 years, which I think we will, 50 years out, I think we'll look at this very differently. I think we'll start to ask a lot of, we'll be very thankful. We'll be thankful that maybe we don't have to work anymore. Maybe we just work part-time. We'll be thankful that AI has come to take away the routine jobs which we don't have to do. Your children and some of the older of us, our grandchildren, may not have to do any more routine jobs. There may be no more household chores. The jobs they have will be fulfilling, interesting, they're passionate about. And I think, maybe it is because we have been so engrossed with being workaholics in this generation or the past 5 to 10 generations. I think it is maybe our maker got sick and tired of it and said, I'm going to throw AI at you. Take away all your routine jobs. So stop running like rats on your wheels. Now think about what it is that you really want to be and what does it mean to be human.
Okay, so you can go home and tell those hardworking Chinese entrepreneurs that. It was great to be here with both of you.